this intense environment and hear the stories that you hear. And, you know, a lot of you come to my office and you have questions around God, and especially when you're dealing with step 2 and step 3. And because honestly, you can't do this work without God. But I'll say this, and it's kind of maybe an assumption, but I couldn't do this work without God. I couldn't hear the stories that you guys bring into the office, the atrocities of life, the battles of reality, if God was not a centerpiece in my own life. And I have learned so much, and I say this to you because you guys have been a teacher in my life in the last 7 years, that you can't go to college for, you can't get a degree in, and it just comes over time, and listening to God and seeing how God moves and changes people, and it invokes a real sense of worship in my own life in regards to God when I see how God changes you, and in that how God is changing me, and it's just really a beautiful thing, and I just want to thank you for that. I'm sorry you had to go through what you went through to get here to be a part of that, but this is really a place where, especially this hour, it's really a place where we can begin to get real and ask these deep questions about life, because I do think there are answers, and I think there's a God who's wanting to answer those questions for you. So I hope in part that will give you hope. But with that being said, I'm Jeff, and I hope I get to hang with you while you're here at the ranch. There's a lot of new faces I hadn't. I was out last week, and I thoroughly missed you guys. If you haven't caught on by now, this is a Christian service. So if you hadn't caught on by now, there's a lot going on besides addiction in your life, that because it's pretty obvious, I think. But you know, it's I mean that as a joke. You don't have to be quite so stiff. But nothing will be forced or coerced. I don't think truth and love can be forced or coerced, because a forced love is a contradiction. So nothing is ever going to be forced upon you. But I do come from the Christian worldview, and so you can take where you're at and what you want, but know that's where I come from. Is that fair? All right. Today I want to talk about the foundations of the Christian faith, because if you look at all the things that get marketed as Christianity, I don't know why anybody would become a Christian when they see some of the atrocities. I mean, you turn on the God channels, freaks me out. And I mean, I know what Christianity is about. I mean, I've studied it. I've made it my life's passion. But it freaks me out when you see some of the craziness that goes on there. And when people come to my office going, I don't want to be a Christian. If that's what they're basing it on, I wouldn't either. Holy cow, I wouldn't want to. And having grown up in church myself, I struggled with, you know, a lot of God questions. I really got into science. And, you know, we live in a world where people believe that God and science are adversaries. And I would say that they're allies. But it was interesting that, you know, so much I discovered going through all of that was really not the Christian faith as taught about in the Bible. I mean, the bells, the whistles, the thrills, the stained glass, the steeples. I remember going to church one time and speaking. I never got invited back. Maybe this is why. But I said, if you are religiously minded, you need the stained glass, the steeples. Somebody's struggling with the water back there. But if you need the stained glass, the steeples, and all the bells and whistles, you're not going to like Jesus of the Bible, because in that way he was not religious. I said, but if you're here, it's all right, take your time. But if you're here, and I'll get this out in a second. But I told the congregation, I said, if you're here tonight and for whatever reason you hate Jesus because of religion, then good news. In that way, he was not religious. And that completely floors some people to think that Jesus is not religious. Matter of fact, when you read Matthew 23, you see Jesus speaking very straightforwardly and very bluntly, to a level that most people would take offense of. and how he called out religiosity. And what I've found that most people really don't have, when they get to know who Jesus is, they really don't have a problem with Jesus himself. They have a problem with religious people who are hypocrites. Yeah, I get it. I was one of those kind of people that I myself have been religiously hurt. I've been wounded by the church. Matter of fact, even been kicked out of a church. Never thought I'd have that on my resume. But what's interesting is that in that time, I remember I would be so hacked off at church, I could drive by a church sign and just want to go, "Argh." Anybody ever been that way? You just get that mad? And the truth of it is, I was upset at the hypocrisy. And then for whatever reason, I think God was dealing with me. I said, I'm mad at them because they're hypocrites. But then I asked myself, what is a hypocrite? A hypocrite is someone who has a standard they don't consistently meet. And then a little voice, not audible or anything like that, but I just heard a little voice going, who does that not apply to? That applies to every human heart. We're all hypocrites. So if you're hiding behind the religious hypocrisy, you're failing to see your own hypocrisy. I want to be a part of a community of believers, which I'll talk about in just a second, not because they're hypocrites, although they are, because I myself recognize my own hypocrisy. And I need to be called out. I need to be held accountable. Does that make sense? It's very humbling. But today I want to talk about 4 basic foundations of the Christian faith. So that if you're sitting here today and you're going, yeah, that all sounds great. I'm really turned off of the religious stuff, but what you're saying is kind of appealing. Let me just say this. The Christian faith is not religion in the sense of religiosity. But it's also not this, what we find so popular in the culture today, it's not this emotional spirituality. You turn on Facebook, or back in the day, MySpace, and it says, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. I don't know how many people I've worked with over the last 7 years, but I'm going to say it's been a bunch. And I've asked people when they go, I'm very spiritual. I've asked them to qualify. What do you mean by that? Do you know I've never had a consistent answer? You know what that logically tells me? No one has a clue. If I were to say, tell me what this is, y'all would say a telephone. We have a clue what this is. But if no one gave me a consistent answer about what this is, it would logically tell me that no one has a clue what that is. And this emotional spirituality is kind of this safe zone. Kind of get the warm, kind of cuddly feelings. But the truth of it is, warm, cuddly feelings don't always change things. I would say the Christian faith is a relationship in truth with the reality of who God is that invites both my head and my heart to come play together. Because a lot of times what fills the void between where my head is and where my heart is addiction. Does that make sense? So here's the first thing that I would mention. The first thing that Christianity is about? Christ. It's about Jesus. And what I found that most people reject religiosity, but they're not really rejecting Jesus. And I would say this. If you reject or you accept Jesus, that's between you and him. It is none of my business. But what I am passionate about is helping people find the reality and the truth of what history says about Jesus and not some religious caricature. Because a lot of people are rejecting the false thing. Does that make sense? Because it's just so important to know who he is. And how do we do this? I'll tell you, we listened to a guy talk a couple of Monday nights ago, a guy named Ravi Zacharias. And I remember when I was in my struggle, and I saw him get up and speak, and I'd heard a lot of these big preachers preach, and my eyes were rolling back in my head, and whatever. And he gets up and he speaks, not in all this religious garb. And one of my pet peeves is when preachers get up to speak, and all of a sudden they change their voice, and there's hallowed be thy name, holy God. And it's all these and thous, and they talk in the King James Version. Who does that? You know what I'm talking about? And they're talking, and all of a sudden they start to pray. Oh, Holy Father, hallowed be. What? And it's like this lack of authenticity. They're switching gears on us. And the truth of it is that I heard this Ravi Zacharias speak, and he brought psychology and philosophy and theology and science and logic, critical thinking, all these different elements that we would in any other aspect of life. And he made this statement. He says, the things that we consider holy and sacred, we must scrutinize them deeper. And with a deeper scrutiny than we do any other aspect of life, because they're considered holy or sacred. And what most of us do, what we consider holy or sacred, we don't scrutinize at all. And the question that I want to ask you is, why do you believe what you say you believe? Wherever you're at, whatever you're going through, whatever your questions are, at the core of who you are, why do you believe what you say you believe? Now, regarding Jesus, we live in a world where people say, great guy. Wish I could have been there, hung with the dude. But being God, whole other story. But I want you to listen to what C.S. Lewis says in his book, Mere Christianity. It's called the Lord Liar Lunatic Argument. He says this, I am trying here to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about Jesus. That I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with the man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Now it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a liar. And consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. He goes on to say, Christ either deceived mankind by conscious fraud, or he was himself deluded and self-deceived, or he was divine. There is no getting out of this trilemma that we face. When you approach these things logically, there is a bit of a dilemma, a trilemma there. Because if Jesus knew he was not God and saying he was God, we wouldn't say he's a good moral teacher. If he was deluded, his cheese fell off his cracker, he was off his rocker, we wouldn't say he was a great moral teacher, we would say he's a lunatic. But nowhere do we find that. Hold your questions to the very end. Or he actually was God himself. So that's something to think about. When we find the very mission of what Jesus was about, he says this, the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. Let me ask you this question. You can raise your hand if you want, but anybody ever felt lost in your life? Yeah, absolutely. I do. And he says the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. Now, the problem is that in this religious culture that we especially have in America, that we seem like everybody has to be perfect before you go to God. And that is the very antithesis of what the Christian faith is about. God says, you can't get perfect before you come to me. Come to me. Because oftentimes we think that God's in the business of changing the suit on a person, but rather God's wanting to change the person in the suit. Does that make sense? He wants to change our hearts, our desires. I know he has mine, and he continues to do so. But speaking of Jesus, he was on this mission. The Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. The second thing I would say is about confession. The word confess comes from two Greek words, homo logos, same, agreement as. So when we think of confession, and pardon me, I don't mean to offend, whatever your religious background is, but it's not about going to a priest. It's about coming to who God is, wherever you're at, wherever you find yourself. And it literally means this, to come to the same agreement as with God. So, if I've lied and I confess to God, God's saying, tell the truth. I've come to the same agreement as with God. Going, you know what, God,